Hello everyone. I wanted to do a quick video here and show you some options where you can use Windows 10 desktop, for example, from your iPad. And I'm doing this because I noticed that there are a lot of YouTube videos that talk about, they do reviews on the iPad and they're all great reviews. One of the common themes, though, that I notice is that either in the subject line, the topic of the video, or in the video itself, they mention that the iPad doesn't replace your computer. It's not necessarily something that would replace your laptop. And I think for the most part that's true. And they, I've heard discussions about why that is, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And that's may not be the goal from Apple. I think if it was, then we would see their laptop line perhaps thin out or go away, but that's not the case. I think there's a use case for both. But for those who are looking for an option to just use the iPad and work with the iPad, there are options to still work with other operating systems from your iPad. So these aren't things that will run on your iPad, but you can certainly access them from your iPad. Now, if you notice on my screen here, I've got 3 icons at the top there. You can certainly set up a VNC viewer that can connect to either a Windows desktop that you have or even a Mac. So I've got an iMac at home and I can connect to that iMac from this VNC viewer. You can also use Chrome's remote desktop app in the same way for both Windows and Mac OS. And then the third option, which is actually my preferred option, just because I think it's more consistent. So with the VNC viewer and the Chrome remote desktop, one of the challenges is you can often run into latency depending on the network performance of whatever location you're in, and if you're using a personal hotspot or if you're using a shared Wi-Fi somewhere and then trying to connect into VNC viewer or remote Chrome remote desktop, those are all running from your home. So your home is hosting that. So depending on what kind of internet connection you've got at your home, that may be a little bit challenging and provide some latency. The other option, though, that I really like and prefer is Amazon's Workspaces. And if I go into my Chrome browser here on my iPad, I have pulled up that website. So if you do a search in Google for AWS Workspaces, it should direct you to their page that talks about what Workspaces is. And from this page, you get a little bit of information about how it works. You can download the client to connect to, which is what I have installed on my iPad. I'll go over real briefly some of the pricing info so you kind of get an idea of how this works. So basically with pricing, you pick which operating system you want set up for you. So you can either choose a Linux bundle, so that's what is displaying here right now, or you can choose a Windows bundle. It's a Windows 10 operating system that is essentially running for you in the cloud. You can pick which region you want that run in, and you want to pick the region that is closest to you and where you expect to be connecting from would be most optimal. And then for each of these bundles, you're essentially looking at what kind of resources you want to use. So we have options here for a single CPU and 2 gig of memory, and then depending on how much storage, local storage you need to support any apps that you want to install or run and whatnot. That's what we're seeing here with, along with the pricing. So the way the pricing works is you can either go with a flat rate monthly pricing. So it's a subscription basically. And that flat rate monthly pricing means that you can have this environment running all the time, 24/7, whenever you need to connect to it from whatever device you're connecting from, whether it's a tablet or a laptop, desktop, or even your phone. That's the cost per month that it would that they would charge you for this to be running full time, basically. The other option is you can go to an hourly pricing approach, where they still charge you a flat monthly fee as a base, and then on top of that, they charge you per hour for your usage. So depending on how many resources you want and how much you're actually going to use it, this could be a way to save a little bit of money while still getting the benefits and advantages of having that environment running in the cloud. So let me scroll down a little bit. So you see here under the Windows bundle options, we have some very similar packaging. We've got a single CPU with 2 gig of RAM. You can do 2 CPU and 4 gig of RAM, or 2 CPU and 7.5 gig of RAM. And each one of those comes with different local storage that you can use and monthly and hourly pricing options. So depending on the usage that you have, what your needs are for a Windows bundle, for example, you might be able to get away with just a 2 CPU and 4 gig of RAM setup. And then the lowest monthly pricing that would cost if you were running it full time is $33 a month. If you wanted to just kind of save a little bit of money, you could go with the hourly pricing, and that would be $7.25 a month. And then anytime you're using it, then they're charging you 30 cents an hour. Now, one of the nice things about the way that they've set up these workspaces is you can configure it and tell it that you want it to automatically stop after an hour of not being used. So if you log into it, especially if you're using this from an hourly pricing standpoint, you log in, you're using it, whatever work you're doing, and then you log out, in the background, it will look for and detect that it's no longer being used, and after an hour of that, it will go ahead and stop that from running so that you're not charged any more than you need to be. When you go to start it back up, it will resume that. It'll start that back up when you log back in and basically bring you back to where you left off. So you're not going to lose anything from that standpoint. So that's kind of an important concept to understand, because when we get down to either the performance or the power, or even higher than that, again, depending on what your usage is. But let's look at power. So power is a 4 CPU host with 16 gig of RAM. And if, let's say, you decided you needed as much as the 175 gig of root volume space, as well as 100 gig of user volume space, you could pay the monthly flat fee of $78 per month and just have it running the whole time. And that would be certainly cost effective if you were accessing it frequently. But if your access was less frequent, but you still needed that type of performance, then you can go with the hourly pricing. So here it'd be $19 a month as your base pricing, and then 68 cents an hour for when you actually use that. And for my purpose, for example, this is the one that I use, is the Power 4 CPU, 16 gig of RAM with the 175 gig. So it's that bottom line there. And I pay the $19 a month flat fee plus 68 cents an hour. And because of the frequency that I use it, it actually saves me quite a bit of money. I don't use it very often. I use it for some very specific things, and maybe a few hours a week or so. So my monthly bill for that line item ends up coming in right around between the $30 and $40 range. So again, it depends on your usage. That is less than that $78 monthly fee. And so, it works for me for now really well from that standpoint. So let's switch over and take a look at what that looks like running on the iPad. So back out to my screen here, I'm going to go ahead and click on the Workspaces icon there in the upper left-hand corner. On this screen, I'm going to log in with my credentials. Now, in order to connect to your workspace on AWS, you will need to configure this. And once you set up your workspace instance in AWS, so you would do all of that on AWS's website first, set up that instance, and then it will provide you details with how to connect. And so there is a code that you will need to configure on this local app here, or on your laptop, or whatever other device you're connecting from. You would do that and get that ready to go. And then from there, you would enter your login information to connect to that environment. Okay, so I've entered my username and password to connect. Now, my environment was actually stopped because it had been longer than an hour since I last used it, and so it went ahead and stopped that for me. In that event, it's going to give me a status of resuming when I go to log in, and it will take a minute or two for it to start up, and then once that happens, then this Workspaces app will launch me right into my Windows 10 desktop environment. If I had logged out and then went to log back in within that hour time frame, it would just take me right in. I don't have to wait for it to resume. Or if I was running the monthly fee and I just have it running full time 24/7, then I also don't have to wait for it to resume. All right, so here's my Windows 10 desktop running in the cloud. This is running on Amazon's Workspaces product. And one of the great things about this is it doesn't take very long for me to spin up a new workspace to use. And if I finish, if there's a specific project or something that I'm working on with that workspace and I'm finished with it and I no longer need it, I can just delete it and then I won't be charged anymore. Or if I do something in that environment that kind of messes up, something gets hosed, rather than worrying about trying to fix it, sometimes it's easier just to delete that environment, set up a new instance of Amazon Workspaces, reinstall what I need, and then move forward from there. So really a lot of flexibility. Imagine trying to do that same thing on your local laptop or desktop if you ran into an issue, then having to go back and fix that. Maybe that requires a reinstall of the operating system, or depending on how bad that gets. So this, certainly a lot more flexible, and now I can access it from pretty much any mobile device that I have. So it makes that really convenient as well. So as you can see on here, I've got down at the bottom, I've got different things installed. I've installed Chrome browser on there. I've got Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. I've got SQL Server running on here that I installed myself. I've got Microsoft Office that I'm using my own license for that I've installed that I can use. So a lot of different, and really you use it just like you're using your own local laptop or desktop. That's the flexibility that it gives you. But now I can access this from anywhere. So the display that I'm seeing here really is much like a remote desktop connection from a Windows standpoint, and it is displaying the screen to me. But on the back end, I'm really using all of Amazon's resources, both for compute and for network. So I get a lot of good performance network-wise when I'm doing certain activities on here. If I have to download files, they download really fast because I'm using, again, their network backbone in order to do that. From a mouse, I don't have an external mouse, and so I can actually use just my finger, the touch, to use mouse options there. So I can go down and I can open up, a browser from the bottom there using that. I can double click. I can right click with two fingers and get those right click options, and then use my left click, just a single click, to do different options there, make different selections there. Also, this works really well with the Apple Pencil. So if you are doing this from an Apple device and you have an iPad with an Apple Pencil, then you can certainly use that Apple Pencil to navigate around and as your mouse. And sometimes that's nice depending on how big your iPad is. If it's a smaller one, like this is a 12.9 inch iPad, so I got a lot more real estate to work with, which is nice. But on a smaller iPad, the Apple Pencil is nice because then you can really click on exactly what you want to see. So when I'm done with my session here, I can simply swipe over from the left. That gives me options to choose from. I can look at different settings and whatnot, but if I simply want to disconnect, I can tap on the power button there. It gives me the option to disconnect. So hopefully this was helpful. It gives you some ideas of different approaches you can use if you prefer to just have a tablet, but know that sometimes there are scenarios or use cases where you need either a full Mac operating system or a Windows operating system. These are different options that you can potentially use to kind of overcome those obstacles while still really taking advantage of the portability of a tablet device.